Hello, everybody, and this is an interview with Dr. Anah, where we amplify the beautiful voices of Black women PhDs. And today, I am so excited because I have the beautiful and talented Dr. Atasha Christian.
Hi, good to see you again.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very
Good.
well. Slept well last night.
Me too. I did. I got a lot of rest and this morning, I did not look at CNN, right? I didn't
Mhm,
need to look at
mhm.
MSNBC. I feel very different today.
Yes.
I
Yes.
slept much more soundly than I think I had in quite some time.
Awesome. And for those who are sort of thinking about what we're referencing, um, yesterday was a very, very historic day. We now have a Black woman vice president, and we also have an educator in the White House who is also a doctor.
Absolutely.
And if you remember correctly, there was a Wall Street Journal article
Mhm.
by, I forget his name, I want to say Epstein.
I can't
I
think of his,
forget his name. I
I
forget
didn't
his
want to put
name.
a lot of energy into his name.
Yeah.
I knew who it was, right?
Yeah. Who basically said, she only has a doctorate,
Right,
but she's not a real MD. So why are we calling her doctor?
right.
Which really didn't sit well with me.
No.
Because I know a lot of folks who have PhDs,
Mhm,
EDDs,
mhm.
who are doctors. So this is part of my inspiration of why I'm doing this also.
Yeah.
I'm also inspired by people like you, Dr. Christian, who, full disclosure, you used to be one of my
Teaching
teaching
assistants,
assistants,
absolutely,
right? And
absolutely.
right now you are doing big things.
Thank you. I'm trying.
And I am so proud of you. I really
Thank
am.
you.
It just warms my heart to see what wonderful things you're doing. So
Thank you. Thank you.
let's get to know you.
Absolutely.
Let's tell the people who you are.
Sure. So again, my name is Dr. Atasha Christian. I have my EDD in counselor education and supervision from Argosy University. I attended the Northern Virginia campus.
Mhm,
Here is what I would say how I started my journey.
mhm,
So I graduated high school. I attended an HBCU. I went to Morgan State University, which is in Baltimore. And I initially thought I wanted to go to law school because everyone shared with me two things. In full disclosure,
mhm,
um, when I was looking at universities, I was told you are really smart and you should go to a PWI. You
mhm,
should
mhm,
not attend an HBCU.
mhm,
I grew up in a predominantly white county in Virginia, and I
mhm,
wanted to be around people that look like me.
mhm.
And
Absolutely.
I had to deal with that resistance from quite a few people. It wasn't just a school counselor, this was extended family, people who you trust to help you make decisions.
Mhm.
But I think that the answer was not because there was judgment placed against HBCUs,
Okay.
but because the mindset was what had been ingrained in our culture for so long is that this is how you're prepared to
Mhm,
excel.
mhm.
And I rebelled against that.
Good for you.
And I attended an HBCU. I fell in love there. I would say to anyone, and people oftentimes will say, gosh, you speak so well publicly, et cetera, in
Mhm,
presentations. I learned that at my HBCU, full disclosure. That was in order to graduate, you had to show proficiency. And so that prepared me. I then decided I didn't want to go to law school because I was working with young people in Baltimore City.
mhm,
So this was my first opportunity to see just generational cultural trauma. I'd not seen that. I'd never seen a person of color having a bad interaction with law enforcement or not having resources in school systems. This was eye-opening for me.
Now, this
So
was that because of through your sheltered background?
absolutely. And so I grew
Yeah,
up
yeah,
very, very low middle class,
yeah,
but
yeah.
the proximity to resources existed because most of the people in my county were white.
Yeah.
So we naturally had better resources. And
Mhm,
so even though I did not have in my family a lot of money,
mhm,
most of my friends did. And again, I was what would be viewed as one of the safe Black girls, right?
Mm.
I was not this person who white people were uncomfortable having me in their home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the truth. I became very aware of that early on in life
That's really
and really found ways to use that to my advantage.
yeah, yeah.
I knew that. I knew what activities to participate in that would connect me to experiences that I could not have any other way, simply because those were just not opportunities that had been afforded to my family.
Yeah.
And so I became this woman at an HBCU who everyone was like, she's Black, but she knows some different stuff, right? And so that becomes an internal battle too.
Exactly.
Because I'm Black.
Yeah.
But I'm meeting people who have a different experience from mine. And I think that's when I became very aware of just double consciousness and this overwhelming responsibility to really wear two faces, to have this loyalty to your culture, to your community, but to also recognize the fact that we also have to navigate in some spaces that historically have not been open for us.
Absolutely.
And so I came back to Virginia.
That's a lot of pressure.
It was. And I would say this.
How did you cope with that? That's so interesting.
So for me, I did not realize I wasn't coping with it well until I entered my master's program in counseling, because those discussions didn't exist. I worked in criminal justice as a probation officer for a while. I did not like it. So I started doing community mental health. And moving into my master's program, one of my faculty members, an Ethiopian woman who pushed me like no other, said, you have to recognize where you are marginalized, and you have to also recognize where you have privilege. And then you can reconcile your internal dilemma. I never knew how to put that in words. Right? I just accepted the fact that some Black people thought I wasn't Black enough. But I also knew that I wasn't white. So I had to, this is a Black woman counselor educator who was able to sit with me and say, I know your struggle. You just don't know the words for your struggle. And I didn't. And I remember watching resistance that she was met with in our academic setting, because she was a pusher. And she made no qualms about, we are going to discuss intersectionality in the classroom, and we're not just going to save it for a multicultural class. We are going to apply this in every course I teach. And I remember becoming very aware, and this was maybe 2011, I was very aware that I was having a battle that I didn't know how to fight.
Wow.
And you think about that, I was 30 years old at that time.
Wow.
And had been fighting that battle alone. Just, okay, there are going to be conferences I attend, and I'm the only Black person in this space, but I was so used to it, I didn't know that it was okay to disrupt that space. I never knew that until a Black woman, faculty member, a doctor, explained it to me, which is the value of women doctors and Black women doctors. There's no one else. There were faculty members time and time again who were able to talk to me, were able to give me great advice. None of them until that woman, Dr. Mimi Getachew.
Say her name.
Say her name, who said to me, this is what you must learn.
Oh, fantastic.
And so then I understood my dilemma, but I also understood my responsibility. And so that's when these
saved your life a little bit. I would say.
He did, absolutely. And I was really blessed that she was there. And then we were blessed with a really awesome program chair, another Black woman, Dr. Matoka Welch.
Wow.
Who was able to say to me, listen, these are your next steps. You need to apply into a doctoral program. You need to teach this. Because I never thought about it. And so I said, okay, if that's what you're saying, do. Because in my mind, when you're sitting with students and talking about evaluating, in my mind, maybe you tell everyone that. And she said, no, no, everyone can't go get a doctorate. I was like, oh, I mean, that makes sense now. You know it after the fact now, but I was like, okay, that makes sense. And that's what happened. And so I applied to a program. I knew that I wanted to teach counselors how to be counselors. And one of my very first assignments at Argosy was to interview someone who was a counselor educator. And I interviewed her. And we were able to communicate via email as well. And I still have the printout. And one of the things she said to me was, be very prepared for people to challenge what you know, just because you are a Black woman. And I was met with that first class.
Right. So the whole microaggression
started early.
Yeah.
Started extremely early. And it started from the space of even having a lot of, I remember having some classes, at Argosy, your writing classes were just interdisciplinary. So anyone who was in a doctoral program would take the same writing courses. And I remember having a classmate who was from another country, and he would make comments one time, and he said, "You speak really well for a Black woman." And I said,
"Excuse me?"
And I bristled.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And in his mind, this was a compliment.
Yes, of course.
And I said, so just to let you know, like, if you go out in the community here in Arlington, Virginia, and you say that, this is not going to fare you well.
No.
And I said, well, why did you think it was okay to say that? And he said, well, and he was from another country. He said, well, from what I saw on TV, this is how Black women talk and act.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't know. I'm giving you a compliment. It's not a compliment. But I understood the theme that's been woven into society of what Black women look like.
Sure, the stereotypes.
Yeah. Absolutely. This was what he expected was a far different person. I mean, it was literally, he almost viewed it as a term of endearment for me. Yes. I could tell that. I could definitely tell he was authentic in his compliment, although it was absolutely inappropriate. And that's when I realized I needed to be true to myself. I needed to talk about spaces for women of color. I needed to talk about our trauma as Black people and how we pass it down from generation to generation. And I shied away from that initially. I knew that was my research. I knew that's what I wanted to do for my dissertation. And I was like, that's not going to work. It's not going to be safe. And faculty pushed me and said, don't complete a dissertation that you're unhappy with. It's gonna be your life's work. And it became that. And and then I was really fortunate enough to be connected to state associations and national associations and be able to present on these big scales and stages and task forces. And people know that I am going to always push the envelope to discuss our cultural trauma and how it impacts us. And then from an education standpoint, how it impacts us in the classroom and what we bring into the room. I remember telling that guy, I responded calmly, but a part of me was upset with myself for being so calm. Because I almost thought, why not show him the rage that existed inside of you? Don't beat the guy up. But he didn't need to see that was safe for him to say to me.
So you were battling the idea of not showing the stereotypical Black angry woman.
Absolutely.
Who should be angry because that was a terrible thing to say, and saying, oh, that's okay. I'm just here to teach you. So it's really sort of pacifying them. Absolutely. And making people feel better for their microaggressions, which is another form of trauma.
It is.
That's a trauma response,
It is, right? We think about that when we talk to our clients and, we talk about how do we change your response? This is, you pacified someone who was in a position of power. And I mean, you look at it for us, what we know in the research for women counselor educators, women PhDs, women doctors in general, and then especially for Black women, is that we have often been evaluated by our ability to pacify students and entertain students, more so than educate. And so I had to become very aware that by not owning and acknowledging acknowledging my true feelings out of fear of being that angry Black woman, because no one wants that.
No.
You know, when you're speaking with passion, someone instinctively says, I'm
Yes.
sorry to make you mad.
Yeah.
You know, we got to have a meeting and talk about performance evaluation,
Right.
but we're not going to talk about what was said to
Right.
trigger my response.
Right.
I had to become aware of that.
Yeah.
You have, you know, I think Black women have a lot of meetings that are totally rooted in interpersonal skills, and none of them are rooted in what's happening in the system to impact those skills. And that was my trauma response. I had become so conditioned growing up to hearing just outward racism, but then I would be told, but you're not like that.
You're
That
different.
you're different. You know, these, you know, normally my parents say Black kids can't come over, but they say that you're different, Atasha. And this is your environment. It's your frame of reference. So you welcome it. You don't know that it's wrong.
Yeah.
And or even teachers who would allow comments to be made. You grow up being taught by your parents, listen to your teacher. So you don't know what's occurring is wrong. And make no mistake, I wouldn't go home and talk to my parents about it because I never thought something was wrong. You know, it was not until I think maybe I was in middle school that I said to my parents what happened, that then my mother and father came to school to address it. And I remember my father saying to me very clearly, how come you never said anything?
Yeah.
And I said, I didn't think anything was wrong with it. And I remember hurt.
Yes.
I remember seeing hurt in my parents.
Yeah.
And then later on as adults, we would talk about what sacrifice do you make for your children, but at what cost?
Yeah.
You know, and so you sacrifice putting them in these school systems that we think are great, and because you have access to resources. But what did it cost you? Because everyone else in my life was Black, my church, my family, but where you as a student spend most of your time in school. And so there just wasn't enough to outweigh those thoughts.
Yes.
So I remember them being very hurt that they not protected me from something, and us having to have conversations about the unfairness of life. And so the beauty of being Black, because I always felt that that was important, but there were also some unfairness. There's some unfairness that exists when you are a person of color.
Oh, absolutely. Now, with this new administration, do you really think that something will be done? Because we've been crying out for this for years. You know, this did not start with, you know, Freddie Gray. It didn't start with, you know, George Floyd. It didn't, although with George Floyd, you know, now everybody, you know, kind of amplified it. But you and I and many brown and Black people have been doing this work and, you know, talking about this for years and years and years. So I'm curious, I know we have a, you know, female Black vice president, but there's so many obstacles, I think, that they will have. And I'm just curious, I mean, do you think that at least something will be done?
I am hopeful that it is. And let me tell you what, in my mind, what I think will have to happen. That responsibility cannot rest on Vice President Kamala, right? It is expected for her to be the person to talk about it, right? This will be vital for President Biden to use and transfer some of his privilege.
Great point.
That's the part that has to exist. That's the only way change will be effective, right? It's expected that she's going to share her lens, you know, as a Black woman, as a woman of color. That's expected. So, and it's not going to be received as well from her because she's literally going to speak from her lived experiences, right? And so, you know, being Black, being in Southeast Asian, they're going to expect that. President Biden will have to be very intentional with his language and very intentional with policy for change to be effective. That I think is possible. I was amazed when he publicly thanked Black people for helping win that election. You know,
Oh,
I remember that night, and I was like, yeah, you need to say it because that's
yeah,
true.
because that's what happened.
That's really what happened. There's no mistake about that. Like let's be
Literally.
very clear cut. There's, you know, and so it's something we always talk about, right? But it was true when we're saying Black women come in and save the day, right? Time and time and time again.
Every time.
Every time. There's no way you can. Kamala Harris could not have won without Stacey Abrams. That would not have been possible, right? And so to see him thank the Black community was important.
Yes.
Those words needed to be said and needed to be heard.
Yes.
And so I think for me, I do believe that he has surrounded himself with enough people who will say to him, you must use your privilege in this space. I also think that First Lady, Dr. Biden, is going to push that.
Oh, yeah.
Because what she had an opportunity to see, and I'm sure she's experienced it before, but what she's had an opportunity to see, but that op-ed that was written about her is that no matter what she had accomplished in life, that she'd been the second lady for 8 years and they'd been scandal free.
Yep.
And she has been a professor, etc. No matter what she'd accomplished, she was reduced down to being a woman. And then the comment was, don't call yourself doctor if you're not a medical doctor.
Right. How dare you?
Right. I mean, and so I think that for a moment, and I'm sure she's had experiences as well, she felt that marginalized feeling. And you learn how to amplify those marginalized voices. And I think because of that, I think that I'm really excited to see that she's still going to be teaching, because I think it keeps everyone connected. I do think that progress will be made. What I also think will be vital, though, and I always say this, you need more counselors at the table.
Yes.
Right? You have to, because someone has to make sense of the community's responses. These are trauma responses. When you are met with cynicism and doubt, that is a trauma response. It's not because you've done anything wrong per se. There are mistakes that you've made, but it's because as a culture, we automatically think, we have you in the White House now, but we just don't trust anything's going to happen, because history has proven that we've always gotten the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
So there have to be people in that space at the table to say, this is a cultural trauma response. You must acknowledge that with this community. That's going to be really important for the administration to do. And I believe that it will happen. I do. I think that there's an extremely diverse cabinet and population that a demographic that's working with him. So I like I said, I went to sleep last night more hopeful than I'd been in the past 4 years. Because our voices had been silenced so much.
Yes.
And we'd been reduced to, our looks were being mocked as women of color, as women. And once we enter that space, it's a hard space to come out of in a healthy space.
Yeah. Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit, just in terms of time wise. What sort of advice would you give a young girl who is thinking and wishing and hoping to perhaps one day be a doctor like you, be a doctor like me, be a doctor like many brown and Black women? What advice would you give her?
The first thing I would say is go for it. Just bottom line. But become very comfortable with doing some things alone. Right?
Okay.
When you're making a decision, and this, when you're making a decision to get your doctorate, it's a deeply personal decision. And there are going to be a lot of people in your life until you find your your doctorate tribe. There's going to be a lot of people in your life who don't understand what you do. They're not understanding why you're reading and synthesizing 20 articles on a Saturday and you like it, right? You know,
And
no one
it.
understands, right? You're like, yes, and another thing, considerations for further study. Okay, you know, they don't get that, right? Because we're a peculiar group of people.
Yes.
And so there are going to be some times when you are a bit lonely, which is, it's going to be vital to find a system that gets you. Your support system is going to look different. There are people in my life who I know root for me every day, but they don't sit beside me and do the dirty work with me. That's my tribe of fellow doctors. Who say, nope, you wrote that, but that's not authentic, write it again. That's that group. The other group will say, great job, and it's not a great job, right? So I would say that. I would also say to not be afraid to get your own counseling and your own help.
Good.
Because your stress level is going to look different and it's going to feel different. It's not just that you're getting a doctorate, it's that you're getting a doctorate as a woman. And you're going to be in a space where you're going to be in a class giving a presentation and people are not paying attention to what you're saying. And they're looking all around, or they're challenging what you're saying, and they're challenging your voice. And so it's vital to get your own counseling, because you will have moments where you feel like no one even cares if I finish. And so that's going to be really important. And then self-care. And self-care is going to look really different in a doctoral program. It could be reading a book or watching a TV show of no academic value, but could be everything for you personally. One book that I read pretty frequently, just at different stages of my life, is Shonda Rhimes' The Year of Yes. It's such a good.
I've heard of that. Yeah. I haven't.
So good.
Really?
So good. And even if you don't have time for that, I watched the interview between her and Oprah when they're in Oprah's, like, you know, first of all, how much wealth do you have that you got woods to yourself, right? This is the woods, Oprah, but it's yours, right? You own it. You know, I'm just like, how are you there? So, you know, Shonda is very uncompromising in her beliefs, you know, and she talks about not necessarily wanting to get married, but wanting to have children. She talks about her personal convictions. And so I encourage people to find women that you can connect with. You will never have a problem finding a man to give you a great quote, but finding women who will say something that will resonate with you, to me, is what has really supported me. And again, being comfortable with telling someone I'm not okay in this space. It pushed me in different ways in my doctoral program. You know, my research was on cultural trauma, and I remember asking my chair, I'm saying, I'm really emotional reading these articles, and he said, that's what's supposed to happen. You know, it's your work, it's your research. You should love it. And I would soak up sitting around the Black women faculty that we did have, the women faculty that we had. And I remember TAing for you one time, and you challenging a student, and I had to watch it because I was like, I don't know how to do this. Like, all right. And I remember we had class like on a Friday night. Remember, it was like the most random time. It was the craziest time in class. Like, you know, and I remember, and it was very clear cut that you were challenging a student. There was no mistake about it, because this student believed something to be fact that was not. And so you challenged just simply an irrational thought and did not back down. And I had to learn that, right? And I remember TAing, and I think it was, I know it was intentional from our chairs. I TA'd under every Black woman. Yes. Every last one. Good. And all of you all did that. All of you all challenged. I remember thinking, okay, this is what I got to do. And you all seemingly anticipated when those students would have an unfavorable review or comment of you. Because you had everything to support what you said. You have to. And that was when I realized, without you all talking to each other. You just knew it. And so I remember saying, this really is a secret sisterhood that you become initiated into, and you just move in a space that has you have to be confident in who you are and your skill set to be a successful woman doctorate.
Yeah.
It's vital. But I remember watching all of you all challenge students, never in a bad way, but to literally educate them.
Yeah.
And none of you backing down, but none of them could say, this person isn't knowledgeable, this person isn't professional. That could never be said about any of you all. And so those are things that, and whether you know it or not, or other doctors know it or not, those are things that you watch as a teaching assistant who's a doctoral candidate, who's a Black woman. And you think, okay, this is, so part of this is the science, part of it is the art of it. And I think women have mastered that art.
Yeah, that's really amazing to hear you say that. Because you're right, because what we do, I think maybe it's a secret society that we belong to, but we have to be better than the best teacher, which means we have to over prepare, because we anticipate a student challenging us and not really, having their own facts together. But challenging us just to challenge us because we are, brown, black women. So it's nice to hear that you were able to see that it's okay. If someone challenges you, that you can, and don't back down because you have the answers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was something that I will always keep, right? Because you feel it when you're teaching your own classes. It's a microaggression to call me professor. If the climate of the university is to call a doctor, and to call a person who's not a doctor professor, that's fine. But that it's doctor because the syllabus reflects Dr. Christian.
Yeah.
So I have to address, instead of letting that go, you all really taught me address it, and say, no, so remember, I'm Dr. Christian. The university's climate is the following. Because I became very aware when it was a microaggression. And you feel it. And that's just the university's policy, and that's what we're going to honor. Yeah.
And it's very different for white female professors, I think. Because I've had a lot of white female professors, tell students to, call me by my name. You don't need to say doctor. I'm like, listen, honey, I don't have that many privileges. I want my flowers as a doctor.
That's right.
All are gonna call me doctor.
And that's it. Yeah. And I noticed that too.
I don't have the privilege to say, oh yeah, just call me Chioma,
Correct. I remember that. I remember TAing for a white, adjunct, and she would let them call her by her first name. And I remember saying, no. And here's the reality, and it sounds harsh, but it's true. When we add up all of our privileges, they're not enough to outweigh our marginalized identities. So it's a privilege for me to allow a person on the street to not call me Dr. Christian. That is a privilege I am extending to you. Right. Because when my chair said, welcome to the academy, my name was no longer Miss Christian. It became Dr. Christian. And so no, as a student, you don't get to call me Atasha. That's just not how we exist.
Exactly.
And I remember here, and they would say, well, so-and-so lets you.
Yeah, no.
I don't know why. No. And I would say this, none of the women of color, Black and brown women doctors that I know, none of them create the space of a first name basis. And you're right, you said it so eloquently. I deserve all my flowers as a doctor. And every time, Dr. Yes, yep. And that's so vital. And I think that's important. You earn that title. It is a earned degree, and all rights and privileges pertaining thereto.
Definitely. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping things down right now. We've had Such spirited and wonderful discussions. I wish we could, you know, talk for hours. There's just so much.
Yeah,
Maybe you'll come back again and
absolutely. I would love to. I'd be honored to.
yes, and we'll talk some more. So the last thing I always ask people is like, what is your favorite quote, and why is it your favorite quote?
So my favorite quote is by Oprah, actually, and it speaks to me because I really do have this mindset that if I see this vision and I manifest it
Mhm,
and I work hard, I can get it, right? Whatever that looks like to me.
mhm.
And so I remember hearing her say this one time, and I wrote it down, and then she's said it before, and she's written in a book, and it is create the highest, grandest vision possible for your life
Mm,
because you become what you believe.
nice.
And that is truly how I live my life. When people say, how did you get to do this, et cetera? And I say, I really manifested it.
Mhm,
I saw what I wanted and I could see it. I
mhm,
could literally envision it,
mhm.
because once I could envision it, I knew that it was within my reach. Because if I can't see myself in that setting, it's not for me, right? And
Yeah.
so if I could see it, then I realized what I needed to do to get it,
Mhm.
and then it literally comes into fruition for me. And then I'm gonna try to manifest a fraction of her wealth. um, but that's whatever. But
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
I look at, and that's really, really something that I has just driven and led me for quite a bit of time. And I've seen it play out so many times
Mhm.
that I trust that hypothesis to be true every time.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Dr.
so much.
Griffin. You're so lovely. And
Thank you. I've learned from all of you all. I
oh
really
my
have.
gosh,
I want to give you your flowers.
I,
I got
I'm so proud of you. And thank you
thank you.
so much for coming here today and amplifying your beautiful voice.
Thank you.
And I'm sure with this, you've helped someone at
I
least.
hope I have.
And hopefully we'll get to talk again sometime.
Yes. Yes. I'll see you soon.
Yeah.